So in this video, let's look at how to make one simple and easy. So let's jump in. Alright peeps, so here we are back in Logic and I have a liquid DnB track that I produce. It's called Don't Know. It's out on all streaming platforms, so go ahead and check that out. But apologies for not having it aesthetically colored and everything. I didn't have time, but I mean, it's all about the sound. So let's just check out the chords, and I'll start off with piano, and this I do with any track, be it Future Garage, chillstep, or liquid DnB, ambient music. I just start off with a simple chord progression on a piano and just gives the mood flowing. So I have a small little loop going over here. It's just 3 simple chords. It's, I think, in the key of C major. So let's hear it. So just simple 3 chords going in the background, and this is how I start off the song. The next up is adding more fillers in the piano section. So what I do is I don't only play the chords in the piano, but I like to add in some fills here and there just to give some variations and different motifs here and there. So what I did here was I kind of let me just solo out these 3 piano fills, and this is what I did. So after the initial 8 bars, I start to introduce little fills, and it's filled with delay. And those are the simple kind of fills which kind of goes for, I think it's about 16 bars. And after, when I start to build the whole song, I start to add more fills, so it's kind of panned either ways. And it's kind of swelling in with the song. It's kind of coming up. So I did an automation with the volume. And that's about it. I kind of do randomization here and there between verses, build up, pre-chorus. As you can see, I have kind of also labeled up over here. And how I made this song was using simple VSTs, some stock VSTs inside of Logic, and also some third-party VSTs, which is again labs. So let's look at the processing chain quickly on how I kind of made this sound like what it is. So I've used a simple labs, and I'm using a soft piano. Nothing engaged. I've not increased the reverb because I have used a third-party reverb through a send channel over here. A simple channel EQ, and this is to kind of give that warm feel. In the liquid DnB track, you would hear that it's a little fast, and we'll come to that later on in the drum groove. But what I did here was I kind of cut down all of the lows because I wanted that kind of filter vibe to the whole piano track. So let's disengage and let's hear how it sounds. And if I kind of engage this, so it has much more rounded feel to it. So I wanted that kind of thick body. I didn't want any bright piano in the whole track. That's why I kind of cut all of the highs and the lows. Over on the bass section, I've kind of put a channel EQ again, a compressor, and a reverb. And why did I put this? You would have seen in my previous video in where I've talked using EQs and compressors on your sends. If you haven't already checked that out, I'll leave the link up in the iCard and also in the description box below. But this is just to kind of tame down the reverb section so that it's not irritating to your ears and it kind of flows in very smoothly in and out of the groove. So those were the piano chords that are going in the background. And what I did with the other piano fills was to introduce tape delays, and it's a bunch of eighth dotted and a quarter note delay and a bunch of triplets here and there, just to introduce some kind of variations throughout the track, because the major chords are kind of ringing out and it's playing the same thing over and over again, so it's gonna sound repetitive. So that's why I introduced piano fills, to keep it far from sounding very mundane and repetitive. So those were the piano parts that I laid down for the whole track, and as you can see, I've used the same kind of chords here and there, but I've kind of used variations, some variations over here with the notes and a bunch of automations, just to take care of the dynamics of the whole song with respect to the other instruments. So once I have the piano laid down, let's introduce some pads. And this is a single instance of Alchemy. It's a stock plugin inside of Logic, and this is how it sounds. It's kind of coming in slowly again with the automation. I've also used a bunch of cutoff automation, and as you can see, it's kind of coming in swelling and it's kind of opening up slowly, and this is where the kind of like the build up starts. And this is just a single kind of pad which is ringing out throughout the song, and I do a bunch of variation over here and some variations here, then I kind of delete that during the bridge section or the drop section, and then I'll reintroduce it for the last part, which is the outro, and it's the single pads which are ringing out throughout the whole song. And the chords are basic chords, used a bunch of seventh chords, suspended chords, and add ninth chords. And that's the beauty of Liquid DnB, and which I also talked in my Future Garage tutorial, that using a simple triad will not give you the desired effect. You have to use some kind of seventh chords and suspended chords to give that lush and warm feel, and that is what the pads are all about. Now let's come to the bass part, and because it's a Liquid DnB, it's a drum and bass, nevertheless you have to have some strong sub bass and bass lines as well. So what I like to do is that for the pre-build up, pre-chorus part, I kind of introduce a sub bass, a thick sub bass, and then I kind of transition into a bass pattern, a strong bass line. So this is how the sub bass sounds, and it is nothing but a single sine wave brought down an octave and used a bunch of compressor, and it's again a stock plugin, an Alchemy inside of Logic. So let me just disable the sidechain. Just a single layer of bass that is kind of going below the whole pads and the piano pads, which then transition into a bass line, which is nothing but a saw wave. And this is exactly what I discussed in my previous videos of creating various bass lines, that using Reese basses and saw wave and then filtering out would give that effect. So let's hear this bass pattern. Now, in terms of the processing, both the bass lines are kind of going into a bass bus. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of doing a channel EQ over there, cutting off all of the highs because we don't need them. And then I kind of boosted around 56 Hertz and then cut at around 124 Hertz. This is just to kind of find out the body of the whole bass, and which sounds better in both the speakers, which are headphone speakers and your phone speakers, because at the end of the day, as like I mentioned in my previous sub bass mixing video, you use various techniques to kind of bring out those frequencies which are not susceptible for the other smaller speakers. So the basses and the some basses do not stand out in your phone speakers or your normal day headphones. So you gotta use a bunch of different kind of mixing techniques, which I explained in my previous video. And the same thing that I used here as well is that I used a parallel bass distortion, and I kind of used a stock distortion plugin inside of Logic, sent both the basses to that bus with a little bit of, I think it's about, yeah, 0 dBs sent. And then I kind of played around the levels of the distortion. And what I did was I brought it down and then I brought it up a little, just where it's starting to poke a bit. So let's hear what the distortion does. So instead of the boominess over here, it kind of brings out that middle frequencies. And that is what you want in terms of using mixing techniques in sub basses and the bass lines inside of Liquid DnB. Because it's a drum and bass, nevertheless, you want the basses and the drums to kind of poke through the mix. And you can only do that by either using various techniques of mixing or using a parallel distortion bus where you kind of poke the middle frequencies of the basses so that it kind of stands out in normal day-to-day use speakers. So now that we have the pianos, the pads, and the bass lines done, let's add in some drum groove. And the key of a Liquid DnB track is this pattern over here. So there are no set rules on how you can create a Liquid DnB track, but a traditional drum and bass drum pattern would sound like this, with every kick on every beat and then the snare on every half beat. And even though notice that the tempo over here is kind of like 90 BPM, it's pretty low, but even though it's sounding very upbeat, and that's because I'm using the closed hats every 16th beat. So it kind of gives that fast tempo feel. So after the initial build-up, I start to introduce other elements like Foley recordings and shakers and open hats. And this is how it sounds. In terms of processing, not a lot is going on. Just the kick, I've kind of side chained it to the bass. And I've also used a channel EQ to cut all of the highs and bring out that frequency that we cut in the bass section so that it kind of sits well in the mix. Apart from that, nothing much. Even the snare, I've kind of done a little bit of EQ just to bring out those middle frequencies, cut all of the lows and the highs because we don't need them. And the rest of the elements are kind of going to a bus where I'm evening out with a simple EQ, a bunch of subtractive and an additive EQ, using a compressor to even out the dynamics, and then using a little bit of reverb. Not a lot, but a little bit. But right now, with the dry session, just hearing the drums, you would feel that the reverb is a little high, but with the mix, it kind of sounds very amazing. Next, I add in some vocal chops, and I've done a detailed video on how I create vocal chops. I leave the link on the iCard and down in the description box, but I use the same technique that I showed. I use the sampler inside of Logic, and then I've kind of used my MIDI keyboard to kind of punch in the notes and the melodies. And what I did was I used a bunch of samples, and then I kind of pitched it up and down. Each and every sample, I kind of pitched it in the key of the song, and then I uploaded that in a sampler, and then I played it like this. In terms of processing, all of the vocal chops layers are kind of going to a bus where I'm using some reverb, some channel EQ, compressor, and some tape delay to give it that ambient feel. And once I have all of the layers down, I start to add in some melodics here and there. So I have an up, a motif that has just simple chords that are going in the piano, and also some string section to kind of give it that depth behind that particular portion of the song. So let's hear it. In addition to that, I also add in some ambiences in the start of the song and also at the bridge section or the build up section. And these are nothing but people talking, some car stereo, and a bird chirping. And lastly, I add in some different chimes and uprisers, some changers, the effects parts, tidbits, fillers here and there. So these are some chimes. This is kind of like an upriser that is coming before the actual drum groove or at every fourth bar, and it's kind of like a drum riser. Then over here I have a vocal reverse. It's in the same key of the whole song. I kind of just flipped a sample and reversed it so that it kind of gives that swell feel. Then I have a small vocal chop over here. And this is like the main vocal chop, the main hook. In addition to that, I have a clock ticking sample, which kind of gives an extra groove. And that's it for all of the elements of the Liquid DnB track over here. And I kind of then place all of the elements here and there in terms of the song arrangement, the intro, the pre-chorus, the chorus, the drop, and the outro. And then I jump into the mixing and the mastering stage, which looks like this. So what I like to do with the mixing session is that I kind of bring all of the channels down, and then I start to introduce one element at a time, starting off with the kick. And then I introduce basses, pads, pianos, and it totally depends upon what vibe you're going. If you want your pianos to stand out or your arps to stand out, your pads to stand out, it totally depends. But just start to reduce one element at a time, and as soon as you hear it's kind of poking just about, just bring a couple of degrees back, because you don't want that to kind of clip when you go into the mastering session. Which brings me to the mastering section, which looks like this, starting off with a correlation meter to check whether my mix is well sounding in mono speakers or not. Then I have direction meter to kind of adjust the stereo spread or the width. Then I have a linear EQ to just a tad bit, not a lot, cut down all of the lows at around 25 Hz and bring out the air at around 7200 Hz. Then I have a multiband compressor to kind of bring out the frequencies or cut accordingly, use various thresholds and the frequency range for the whole mix. And the next set of few plugins go hand in hand, and these are just to kind of bring out the loudness to the desired streaming platform level, which is kind of like minus 14 dB for minus 14 dB LUFS for Spotify, and I think minus 11 or 12 for SoundCloud. So I use the adaptive limiter to bring out the gain, and then I kind of check with the loudness meter, the peak level meter, and also analyze my frequency range over here so that I see whether if I'm going too muddy, if my mix is sounding too muddy or too bright. I then go ahead and check each and every instrument which is causing that problem, then I try to fix it. And that's about it. That's how I kind of create a Liquid DnB track. Okie dokie guys, that about wraps it up for this video. Hope this was helpful. Link your song down below in the comment section and I'll be happy to hear them. As always, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. And if you like what I do here and want to see much more videos like this, consider subscribing and hit that bell so that you can stay updated. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, cheers.